Hey there, and welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to be talking about the cosine law. So, first of all, what is the cosine law? Well, you might remember in our last video, the sine law, we talked about how not all triangles are right triangles, and so you're not going to be able to use SOHCAHTOA or Pythagorean theorem every time. This law, the cosine law, is a complement to sine law, as in you're going to use it in very similar situations. Really, what you want to do is you have two sides and an angle that you know, and then you want to solve for a third side, or you know three sides, but you don't know any of the angles, and so you want to solve for an angle. So there are situations where you can use cosine law that you can't use sine law. Okay, so with the formulas that are written on the left there, you can see that the only time that you use an angle is within that cosine on the right. Everything else is in terms of the side lengths themselves. So with that out of the way, let's get into some of these practice problems. Okay, so we'll start off with the following example. So we have two sides and the opposite angle to f, and side f is an unknown. So this is an ideal case for cosine law for when you want to use it. So we're going to start by writing out what we have. Side f is an unknown, so we'll say that side e is equal to 5, side d is equal to 3, and that angle f is equal to 33 degrees. So, writing it out from cosine law, we get that f squared is equal to d squared plus e squared minus 2de cosine of f. Okay, so as you can see, the side that is corresponding to the angle. So in this case, we have cosine of f. So we have side f on its own side. It only pops up in the equation once. So let's start by solving for this. So we have that f squared is going to be equal to 3 squared plus 5 squared minus 2 times 3 times 5 times the cosine of 33 degrees. Here I'm going to get that f squared is equal to 9 plus 25 minus 30 times the cosine of 33, which is 0.8387. Okay, so running through these calculations, what we find is that f squared is equal to 34 minus 25.1601, or that f is equal to 8.8399. So that's f squared. To solve for f, we take the square root of both sides, and that's going to give me an f value of 2.97. So therefore, the unknown side of my triangle, side f, is equal to 2.97. Okay, so right here what we have is three sides and an angle that we want to solve for. So you might notice that even if we wanted to use sine law in this case scenario, remember that sine law requires that we already have an angle defined. We can't use it here. We also can't use SOHCAHTOA, right? Because that requires a right triangle. So the only way that we can actually solve for this angle as of right now is to use cosine law. So we're going to say that G is an unknown angle. Its opposite side, G, is going to be 16. We're going to have that H is 14 and that I is equal to 12. So we're going to start by writing out a formula. G squared is equal to, we have the two other sides, so H squared plus I squared minus 2hi cosine of G. So we'll do some rearranging to start us off. So G squared minus H squared minus I squared is equal to negative 2hi cosine of G. At this point, we'll divide both sides by negative 2hi. Divided by negative 2hi. And this gives me G squared minus H squared minus I squared divided by negative 2hi is going to give me the cosine of my unknown angle G. Okay, 16 squared minus 14 squared minus 12 squared divided by negative 2 times 14 times 12 is equal to the cosine of the angle G. So let's do some quick math. I'm just going to plug it into my calculator in one go up top. So we have negative 84 divided by 2 times 14 times 12 on the bottom. Negative 336 is equal to the cosine of G. So I'm going to continue on the side here. So 84 divided by 336 gives me 0.25 is equal to the cosine of G. I take the inverse cosine of both sides, which is going to give me that the angle G is equal to 76 degrees. So, using cosine law, and only cosine law, we were able to find that the angle G is equal to 76 degrees here. Okay, so we'll go through this third example together. So we have 120 degrees as the angle, and you might notice that we have those lines on the triangle, right? On these two sides right here. What that means is that those two sides are equal in length, right? So we have an isosceles triangle right here. So we can write 22 for this side as well. So at this point, we have the angle E is equal to 120 degrees. And then we have the sides D, which is 22, and F, which is equal to D, which is equal to 22. So E is an unknown, and we want to solve for E. So setting up our cosine law equation, we find that E squared is D squared plus F squared minus 2df cosine of E. Okay, so we'll start plugging everything into this equation. So that's going to give me that E squared is equal to 22 squared plus 22 squared minus 22, the cosine of 120 degrees. So, plugging everything into our calculator, that gives me E squared is equal to 484 plus 484 minus 2 times 22 times 22. So it's going to be 968. And the cosine of 120 is negative 0.5. So this is going to give me E squared is equal to, I have 968, and we're going to get plus 484, right? We're multiplying it by negative 1/2, which means it becomes positive and divides by 2. So that's going to give me that E squared is equal to 1452. So at this point, I would like to take the square root of both sides. The reason is I have to solve for E by itself, and I get that E is equal to 38. Okay, so using cosine law, we found that the value of the side E is 38. Okay, so we'll go over this example right here. I'll get you to go ahead and pause the video. I've written out all the variables that you need to know here, so pause the video and come back when you're ready to see the solution. Okay, so you can see that we have sides A, B, and C that are known and an unknown angle A. So maybe you felt comfortable isolating, maybe you didn't. It's all good either way. What matters is that we have A on its own side. So A squared is equal to B squared plus C squared minus 2BC cosine of A. So I'll review the isolation one more time. So A squared, and we're going to subtract B squared, and then subtract C squared from both sides. So minus B squared minus C squared divided by negative 2BC is the cosine of A. So 32 squared minus 44 squared minus 21 squared divided by, change that a little bit, divided by 2 times 44 times 21 is the cosine of A. So plugging everything into my calculator, what I get there up top is negative 1353, and that's going to be divided by 2 times 44 times 21, negative 1848 as the cosine of A. So if I divide those two numbers, I'm going to get 0.7321 as being the cosine of A. I take the inverse cosine of both sides, and that gets me 43 degrees is equal to the angle A. Okay, so now that we have talked about how to solve cosine law, we're going to incorporate cosine law into a larger triangle solution. So we have angles A, B, and C in this triangle, but they're all undefined, and we have three sides. So it's clear that we have to start with cosine law. So I'm going to write here 1 cos law, and we're going to solve for the angle A. Practically, it doesn't matter which angle you solve for. I'm picking A just because it's convenient for me. So we're going to get, assuming that A is equal to 18, B is equal to 9, and C is 14. A squared is equal to B squared plus C squared minus 2BC cosine of A. So that's going to give me A squared minus B squared minus C squared divided by negative 2BC is the cosine of A. So up top, that's going to give me 18 squared minus 9 squared minus 14 squared divided by negative 2 times 9 times 14, which is going to be equal to, on the top, we're going to be left with a value of 47. So that's 47 divided by, on the bottom, we're going to get negative 252. Or when we divide them, we're going to get negative 0.1865 as being the cosine of A. We're going to take the inverse cosine of both sides, and that gives me 101 degrees is equal to A. So we'll continue now with part 2, which is going to be using sine law to solve for a different angle. So let's solve for the angle B here. So sine law to solve for B. So what we get here is that this sine of B divided by B is the sine of A divided by A. Or that the sine of B is B times the sine of A divided by A. So this will give that sine of B is equal to 9 times the sine of 101 degrees divided by 18. So that's going to give me is that the sine of B is equal to 0.4912. Take the inverse sine of that, and I get that B is equal to 29 degrees, which does make sense. B is the smallest side, right? So now we're going to go into part 3, which is to solve for the angle C. We can use both sine law and cosine law here, and we could have also used cosine law in question 2, or part 2 of this, just to clarify. But now that we have two angles, the easiest thing to do is to use angle sum. So we'll get 180 degrees is equal to A plus B plus C. Here, that's going to give me that 180 degrees is 101 degrees plus 29 degrees plus C. Or that 180 degrees is equal to 130 degrees plus C. As a final answer, this is going to give me that 50 degrees is equal to C. Okay, So that's it for this video on how to use cosine law. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you learned something valuable.